One of my favorite games from the PS4 generation is one of the very first games I ever played on a PS4. Like I had a couple of friends, we would all play games together. They're the ones that like introduced me to The Last of Us. We're like, dude, you gotta play this, it's so good. And we would all like literally sit in my bedroom and play the game on my little monitor and pass the controller around. And I remember going to King Soopers, our grocery store, and buying a gallon of chocolate milk. I specifically preferred the store brand over the True Moo chocolate milk because it was like thicker and chocolatier, if that's a word. Big old bin of Goldfish, Fruit Gushers, and chocolate milk. How I'm still alive, I don't know, but I'm here and I'm vibing. I'm vibing. So one of the games we played back then was a narrative game that was really good for parties and group settings. And that was a little game called Until Dawn. And if you've never played Until Dawn, basically it is a big narrative focused game that is all about branching decisions and varying choices. So it's kind of like a choose your own adventure. And we've had a few more games like this that have come out since then. You know, one of the other big companies that does it is, what's the studio? It's David Cage's company that did like Detroit Become Human and those games, Heavy Rain, stuff like that. And they're really fun games in party settings, specifically because in the case of Until Dawn, there are multiple characters. So you can set it so it's like, okay, I'll play as this character and this character. You play as that character and that character. And then you're going to play as these two characters. And then you guys will play the others. And then every time that character comes up throughout the story, you just hand off the controller. And then you're watching like a movie as they're making the choices that interact and change how your choices are kind of Quantic Dream. Thank you. How they're filtered through the world. One of the most surprising announcements recently was actually that they are going to be remaking Until Dawn. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it's not actually the original studio that's remaking it. It's a different team entirely. It's Ballistic Moon. But they show the remake, and the second you see the bathtub, you know what game this is, because it's one of the first scenes is a character in this tub choosing to get out because there's weird sounds in the house. And so very, very iconic. So when I heard that they were remaking it, I was like, oh baby. But I still thought the original looked really, really good. Really, really good. It's a 2015 game, but it's a game that has been praised because it was so graphically ahead of its time. But this YouTuber, CYCU1, put together a comparison side by side of the PS4 versus PS5 graphics of the game. And the original game ran at 30 FPS, and it showed, sometimes struggling to even hit 30. And like, looking back at it, I'm like, okay, yeah, no, it's clearly a 2015 game. You know, there's limitations on the material work. The hair really stands out. One of the things that was like a telltale thing of Until Dawn was specifically that they would do these really close, really tight face shots and close-ups. And they would do it with a super heavy depth of field effect. And that basically allowed them to crank the quality on the face models and facial animations, and then everything else could have low resolution textures. Everything else could kind of be less of a priority because the face was the full frame. It was one of the most iconic things about this specifically, and the games that would follow from it, whether like the Man of Medan or any of the horror anthology that they put out after that, or the Quarry even still does it a lot. So it's one of the telltale things of these types of games is the super intense close-ups. But this is the original. And then the remake. Smooth, buttery. I think the hair looks way better. The smooth 60, the resolution's also way higher. I mean, let's just be completely honest. The resolution's way higher, which you'd expect. Tonally, little darker, little more contrast heavy. The side by side, they're actually lighting them a little more fully instead of relying on the shadows to kind of cover up some of the detail. It's like in a lot of those recent Marvel movies where they just have entire cutscenes and sequences and fight scenes in like the pitch black of night, because when everything's dark, you can't see anything. So it's like, oh yeah, we don't have to spend that much on special effects when everything's dark. Kind of like Game of Thrones in the last season, like that last fight, the last big battle. Everything's so dark, you can't tell what's going on. And then they changed the angle a little bit, but I do think the hair looks better. The model seems to be lit very differently again. Like it's more full. You know, they have not just a single key light off to the side, they have the key light flipped over to this side and then a fill light. And it might be a different, honestly, it might be a different scene that they're cutting it from. But it's also when she's still wearing the jacket in the bathroom. So I'm guessing it's the same scene. They've just gone back and rearranged the shot. So, you know, I think it's 1-to-1, but clearly big improvements have been made. I like it. I do think it's going to be interesting to see tonally if it feels the same. Because you're right, Schlaben, I do think the original looks more stylized. I think part of the reason it was stylized like this is because of hardware limitations, and they could only have so much on screen happening at a time. And if they wanted this level of fidelity on the face, they had to make sacrifices elsewhere in the environment. So now, you know, they can have more of the background in the shot. They don't have to darken it out so aggressively to kind of distract you. Yeah, you can see like individual pores on her cheek. It looks like her eyebrows are individual like hairs, and same with the eyelashes instead of just like one big mesh. So looks good. These comparisons, kind of tough to see. The mask is night and day. I mean, the mask is night and day. It's definitely a different mask. But I mean, again, the thing that I just keep noticing in all of these different shots is that they've redone like all of the lighting, and most of the lighting work that they are redoing is specifically to show more instead of less. The original, everything's so dark and black off of the main focus of the frame that you can't really see anything. Even if your eye was to be diverted, you still can't really see anything. Whereas in the remake, they're like, no, we can light his hair. We can light the hair and show everybody the hair that's going on. The eyes, we can show some high quality eyes. We can do that. We can do some like really cool texture work on the teeth too, make that look super scary. We don't need to hide everything in the darkness. Sweater's been redone a little. Looks like the motion blur's been reworked as well. The lighting in the original is just a lot harsher. You can also tell like the direction of the light's been totally changed. So originally like the moonlight's coming in from over here. Now the key light is off the front. And this is something that like I've shown you guys before. There's some like core rules of lighting in a lot of instances that a lot of artists will hold to. The common thing, especially in modern games, there's also snow on her clothes. It doesn't seem to be present at all in the remake. But one of the most common things that they'll do is something called Rembrandt lighting, which is usually identified just with a single triangle of light, like on the cheek on the outside of the frame. So like if I turn a little bit more, you can see kind of like just a triangle of light right here on my cheek. Just a little triangle, like a little isosceles triangle right there on my cheek. That's what you're usually aiming for with Rembrandt lighting. And it goes back to, of course, the painter, Rembrandt. It just looks pleasing to the eye, honestly. It just, for whatever reason, our brains kind of like it. And you can see it all over the place in all these famous portraits where there will be a triangle of light in these sequences. And I mean, whether you're looking at a film like Schindler's List or Marvel's Avengers, whatever, they probably are using a similar thing. One of the other things that's very common is that they will put the shadow on the side of the camera. So when you put the lit side of the face towards the camera, it gives a different tone than when you put the shadowed side towards the camera, like here, where this appears very cinematic, very dark and brooding, whereas something that's a little more full and facing the camera is a little more open and just a tad more like welcoming almost, you know. It's a small distinction, but if you can showcase the shadow, it looks very, very cinematic. Our brains just like the way it looks for, again, whatever reason. Maybe it's how we're conditioned that way. Maybe it's whatever. This is a really good example of the triangle I'm talking about. So you see the triangle on the cheekbone. That's exactly what you look for. So it looks like something very similar has happened here where they've gone back in, and instead of doing this really aggressive single key light and then everything else is black and shadow, they're trying to do something a little more subtle with a key light off about 45 degrees and then letting the rest of the light kind of fill in, maybe with a fill light on the opposite side, or just letting the ambient lighting do that. So again, might be technically more correct, but it's a very different vibe because this is very artistically striking, strong key light from the moonlight, very aggressive, high contrast, but then this is much, it's not necessarily flatter, it's just more, it's more correct, you know? According to the rules of cinematic lighting, it's more correct, but sometimes rules are meant to be broken. So who knows? I mean, the people that light these scenes in these games are amazingly talented. Like, there's no doubt about it. All they do all day, every day is like light scenes like this in video games. So they know what they're doing, but it's a very intentional choice. And that's what's important to note, is that none of this is accidental. All of these lights being reworked to be more soft and less aggressive like this, it's very intentional. Part of it could just be that they're like, hey, the moon wouldn't cast a shadow that sharp. It's not a spotlight. So we're going to redo it, and it's going to be softer and more ambient, more realistic. That could be the entire consideration. That could be it. Because this is much less realistic than the other. But this also has more of a sort of B-grade campy horror movie vibe to it too, you know? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just they're different. They're tonally very different. I remember the teeth always looking funny in these games. And they've done some work to improve it. Look at that. It's tough because these scenes have a lot of movement in them, and so it's really hard to get a still shot of the scene to compare when there's a lot of thrashing and moving because she's about to be chopped in half. So kind of makes it tough. But yeah, the side-by-side right here is just night and day. So it seems that a lot of assets have seen total reworks and improvements. Character models are probably mostly just softer upgrades, but pretty cool. I am glad to see it. I'm excited to see whenever that ends up happening. Have they said? It just says it's coming to PS5 and PS4 in 2024. So later this year, presumably we will get it. But I mean, the original is like 10 years old. It's almost 10 years old. Next year it'll be 10. So buckle up, man. Buckle up. He took my thing.